hour. We're so grateful for you being here. I'll be your host, Brett Cease, and tonight's topic is Fall 2024 Lobby Day Training, Primary Asks, and Legislative Plan. We're going to be joined by Government Affairs Vice President Ben Pendergrass for a training that's going to review more details in the context for CCL's Fall 2024 Lobby Primary and Supporting Asks, as well as guidance for lobby teams as they plan their online meetings. Attendees will have the chance to start strategizing for upcoming fall lobby meetings, get more information on the meeting asks, and have time to get questions answered by CCL's Government Affairs team. This is our recommended training for any CCL volunteer planning on being a part of their group's Fall 2024 lobby meeting. And if we've done our job well, you are going to walk away with the following 3 learning goals: reviewing our primary ask around Energy Permitting Reform Act, reviewing our secondary asks around the RISE Act, and then reviewing our co-primary ask around defending the clean energy provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. Without further ado, thank you all so much for being here, starting to put your questions in the chat, and I will pass it to you, Ben.
Great, thanks, Brett. Well, I think we should all start with what's going on in Congress right now. So we have now entered what's called the lame duck period. And so what's going on with the lame duck? The lame duck's always a unique opportunity at the end of a Congress when you have lame duck members that are maybe not going to be in office. You might have a lame duck president, as we do now, but Congress usually still has stuff they need to do. One of the things that is always interesting with a lame duck is the election has an impact on what's doable in the lame duck. And with Republicans winning the House, the Senate, and the administration, it definitely sets up certain things you can do in the lame duck and certain things you can't do. But right now we have something interesting going on where we have an opportunity in the lame duck to still get some climate wins. So what do they need to do in the lame duck? Well, they still need to fund the government. Government funding expires on December 20th. They've got to do some sort of funding bill. That's an opportunity. They still need to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. That's another opportunity to still pass something. There might be a disaster funding bill that might be separate or might get wrapped up into the bigger government funding bill. And they still need to finish the farm bill. We now know with the farm bill, at least, it looks like they're going to do a year-long extension. They're just going to kick the can down the road on the farm bill. We're not going to see anything major happen. It's just going to be an extension of the current law. But like I said, we do have some opportunities. One of the things that's setting it up interestingly is usually when a party gets a trifecta, it kind of takes away the incentive for them to negotiate during the lame duck period. They're kind of like, let's just kick everything to next Congress when we will hold all the levers of power. But one of the things that's interesting is the control of Congress is so narrow that dynamic doesn't exactly hold. And one of the things we're most interested in, permitting reform has bipartisan interest on both sides, and so there's some motivation to get that done. But the big question that is still outstanding: do they want to kick the can on a lot of stuff to next Congress, or do they want to do what they call clear the decks? Just get everything done they can get done now and have kind of a fresh start in the new Congress. And there's some pretty strong voices pushing for let's clear the decks, let's continue to get stuff done. So this is where our opportunity comes into play, our primary ask. Our primary ask for this lobby day is going to be the Energy Permitting Reform Act of 2024. All offices, both Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate, are really good for this ask. We want every single member to hear why this is an important bill, why this is an important opportunity. The top line message is support the Energy Permitting Reform Act. I'm just going to start referring to as EPRA. Pass the bill this Congress. And the big thing is we need all members, not just it's not a co-sponsor ask. It's not a mark this up. It is ask your leadership to move this bill during this lame duck portion of Congress. So briefly reviewing what's in the bill, we're not going to go into it in depth, but you have to remember there's provisions to accelerate transmission, build out, and permitting. There's stuff that will help get more clean energy on federal land. There's judicial review provisions that will shorten the statute of limitations for all energy projects. There's some stuff that will make domestic mining more feasible and more likely to come back to the United States in some ways in a still environmentally responsible way. Originally, the bill, well, it still has more oil and gas and renewable lease sales things, but we'll get to more of that later. And then there's some provisions around expedited LNG export terminal permits. as you guys have seen and loading slowly, um, when the bill was released, there was some modeling done. It took us a while to get the modeling from resources from the future, from Rocky Mountain Institute, Princeton University Zero Lab, Jesse Jenkins, and the Third Way. And what this modeling found is this bill was going to be a really good climate bill. As you can see, I'm sure all of you have seen this chart multiple times, and this is from the Third Way. They kind of put together the emissions impact of the oil and gas and LNG provisions on the left side of the screen, and the blue towards the right is the transmission provisions. And basically what they found is almost in any scenario, this bill does reduce emissions. One of the things that's really important in talking to the modelers is they think it's really more towards the like greater emission scenarios than like the lower emissions reduction scenario. So this is a good bill for climate. And one of the things, if you click through here, Brett, like we can see, this is our current path right now. These next two lines are energy permitting reform if this bill is passed based on this modeling. So this shows us, keep clicking through exactly, you see those numbers on that previous page, you're like, what does that really mean? Well, these are the actual numbers that Dana has helped model out to show like what does that actually look like as far as percentages of emissions reductions, and clearly they get us some big numbers. But one thing I think it's really important to point out is great as those numbers are, the modeling doesn't take into account all the provisions. It doesn't take into account the technology specific stuff that's in there that allows for some categorical exclusion for geothermal activities that require geothermal cells, that has some stuff to allow hydropower things to proceed by 4 years instead of 3, and just generally the fact that in some of the provisions will make it easier to build clean energy just generally. That's not captured in that modeling. So the bill probably has even greater impacts than are shown in that modeling. One thing I do want to emphasize, as we've all been aware, it does have those oil and gas provisions, the offshore and oil and gas cell leasing things, the onshore leasing things, and the LNG export permitting approval process through DOE, which in a perfect world, we would not want to see a permitting bill that had those things on there. This was a compromise. But one of the things that has changed in the dynamics around this bill is all those things can actually pretty much be done by the Trump administration. So these in some ways are no longer like things that are like a compromise. They're kind of the baseline of what's going to happen. So if we don't pass this bill, we basically get those oil and gas provisions, but we don't get reforms that we really know are key to reaching our climate goals. And the other thing we get that we wouldn't otherwise get necessarily are those offshore wind leases. There's no requirement that they offer those, so those could go away if we don't get this bill passed. But I'm not going to talk any more about the bill details because our wonderful Dana Nuccitelli has done an extensive training on all the modeling, on all the bill provisions. And so we'll drop in the chat here. If you have not yet watched that, when he did that training back in, I believe, September or October, watch that. That's where it's going to be the deep dive on all the details. I mean, I think that training was almost an hour, so we don't have time to go into that level of details, but I want to just remind people why we are supporting this bill. So right now, there's definitely a bipartisan path for EPRA, and there's a couple reasons for that. Both sides have reasons they should want to advance the bill. Democrats get permitting reforms that make building clean energy and transmission easier. Republicans get permitting reforms they've long supported, and even those provisions around oil and gas, there's some clarifications. There's the mining provisions, which honestly are bipartisan as well, because it was based on a bill that was actually a Democratic bill, and they also get the clarification around LNG permits. So there's reasons for both sides to proceed now. All right, so what are the top line messages? For Democrats, the top line messages are really renewable energy stands to benefit greatly from permitting reform. Like we can't get emissions reductions unless we put steel in the ground and build stuff now. And one of the best ways to reduce emissions is to build clean energy faster. Honestly, and we all know we're not going to be able to hit our climate goals without transmission expansion. This bill does that. And like I said, it will lock in climate wins by putting steel in the ground if we are able to build stuff faster. That's why Democrats want to see this passed. So the like top ask, it's like I said before, it's not a co-sponsor ask, it's an ask your leadership to support this bill and move it as part of a package to use any means necessary to see this move forward this Congress. Top line message for Republicans. This bill will make it easier to build all forms of energy infrastructure. We believe that renewable energy will benefit the most, but it will make it easier to build everything, which has long been a Republican priority. Transmission, even though it hasn't been a Republican priority, should be because it will lower costs and improve reliability for all Americans. That's something Republicans do care about. And one really important point, and this is why it makes sense for them to do this now instead of wait. You can't do permanent reform through reconciliation, which is usually a partisan process to bypass some of the Senate filibuster rules, which Danny will talk about a little bit more later. And you can't do all this stuff through executive action. You got to have bipartisan support. Even when Republicans control both houses next Congress, you're not going to be able to move a bill like this with just Republican support. So it's like, once again, to lock in a win for the economy, lower costs, and increase reliability for American households. So it's the same top line ask of like asking them to push their leadership to allow this bill to proceed as part of a package. All right, so what's the path here? So as most of you know, the EPR bill passed the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee 15-4 earlier this year. So it's cleared committee. That's super important for being attached to an end of the year package. We know there's no House version. So you don't have to worry about that. Just focus on the Senate bill. Everybody knows there's no House version. But so what has to happen is it must be attached to a moving vehicle, a must pass bill, possibly the NDAA, but more likely the spending package. It doesn't really matter. How it gets done doesn't matter to us. It doesn't change the bill. There's no impact. It's just political will to move it forward, and that political will is increasing. But to have this happen, you're going to have agreement from both sides of leadership, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate. And so that's what we're looking for. All right, in talking about momentum, just tonight, the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus released this statement. The time is now for a comprehensive permanent and transmission reform package. Energy development in the United States is continually hampered by our nation's burdensome regulatory process. At a time when energy independence remains an economic and national security imperative, more must be done to enact meaningful reforms. This sentiment has been echoed by congressional Republicans and Democrats alike, and now is the time to act. As we near the end of the 118th Congress, we look forward to seeing bipartisan permanent reform legislation be considered and advanced. Signed by the co-chairs, Chrissy Houlihan and Congressman Garbarino from New York. So right now we have the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus coming out in support of moving this bill now. So we know this bill has compromises and wins for the climate, but this is a great opportunity to get an important climate win, and it could be one of the biggest ones when we look back if we get this done. We can't let perfect be the enemy of good. This is the best I think either side is going to get in this moment, and I think the climate really comes out ahead and the momentum's building, and so now's the time to make this final push, and so we're going to push as hard as we can with all our allies and move this bill over the finish line. So, because this is an active bill, I mean, like, things are happening as we speak. Letters are being released like tonight. Another one, the Blue Dog Democrats actually released a letter calling for package of the bill today as well that they sent to leadership. All kinds of people are coming out trying to push this bill forward. So we are working in a broader coalition with Senate and House offices to try to collectively push this forward. So we're in a real-time situation here. So we're going to do a little bit differently. We still want you to take meeting notes and submit those, but we want a real good snapshot when you come out of your meetings. And the way we're going to do this is when you come out of your meeting, we want you to do an email to the liaison coordinator email that says the name of the senator or representative you're meeting with and a number attached to it. One, if you came out of that meeting, you're like, they clearly support this. Two, it seems like they're like, hey, I think we could maybe get behind it. We might have a concern or two, but we think overall it's a win for the climate. Three, you just get down, they're undecided. They're like, we haven't talked to the boss. We don't know where we are. That's a three. Four is like, we have serious concerns. We don't think we can get there. and 5 is opposed. These numbers will help us take a really quick snapshot to figure out what offices need extra information, what offices we can count on to be supportive. This is going to be really instrumental to our ongoing coordination and outreach to offices among our whole broader coalition. So this is something new. If you have any questions, Mindy will be around on some liaison stuff to talk about this in the coming weeks, and we'll get it right. But this is something new and really important to get done. In a second, but just before we move to questions, we have one secondary ask. And as with all secondary asks, this is something like you want to focus on the primary asks, and we have one more co-primary ask for Republicans. And the secondary ask is, if you have time, please bring this up. Now, this is an old familiar bill, and you're going to be wondering, like, why are we bringing this up? But if you've been around for a couple of years, you probably remember the RISE Act. It basically gives offshore wind parity with offshore oil in the way it distributes funds from those federal leases back to states. So it creates funding for coastal infrastructure and resiliency efforts. It's a revenue sharing model that really will help offshore continue to gain purchase power, where, like, if states are getting something back, they will more likely want to support it. The same with oil and gas is now. And so this is a really important bill to help develop the offshore wind industry and also to send funds back to the states for coastal restoration. There's also some some LWCF funds in there and stuff like that, which is an onshore conservation fund. It's a good bill. We've worked on it for 4 years. So this is why we're doing this secondary ask. We've worked on it for 4 years. This really might be the last opportunity to pass RISE. Just this week, as I said, things are happening in the lame duck. It passed the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee on Tuesday. That was kind of the last step to where it could potentially get attached to one of these packages. And so the message on RISE is very similar. Like, it's great if people co-sponsor. I mean, we've been adding co-sponsors this week alone, but the ask really is maybe co-sponsor and tell leadership to include it in any year of the end of the year package. So that's what we want to see for a secondary ask. And with that,
Thanks, Brett, and hello, everybody. Thanks for turning out on a Thursday evening to educate yourself about all these things, get prepared for the lobby day. I'm going to be covering the Republican co-primary ask, a new term here. I'm Danny Richter. I'm a policy fellow at Citizens Climate Lobby, and I have been focusing my work on carbon pricing and defending the IRA, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight. So I have 3 goals in my part of the presentation tonight. Number 1, I hope you'll end my remarks having a familiarity with the Republican co-primary ask and why we picked it. I hope you understand the points in the ask and why we think they're important. And I hope you'll understand the context Republicans are operating in so you can be more effective when you meet with them. I'm going to hope to achieve these goals with this agenda. First, I'm going to cover why an IRA repeal attempt is likely. 2, how the repeal could happen. 3, I'll go over the co-primary ask. I'll then take a step back and say why this ask now. Then we'll go to some conclusions and some Q&A and discussion. So first of all, why Republicans will try to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, was passed only with Democratic votes. It's Biden's signature achievement, and Trump has railed against it in the campaign. On top of that, Republicans look best to their voters when they're cutting spending, and the IRA represents a lot of spending. And there will be a need for money next Congress to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, which is also known as the Trump tax cuts. That is their number 1 priority going into the next Congress, is to extend those tax cuts. And the IRA is a revenue source. And so if you have a revenue source by cutting, then you can fund those tax cuts. So this is why we think the Republicans are going to go after the IRA. So the next question is, can they repeal it? The answer is yes, they can, controlling the presidency, the House, and the Senate, but there's some important constraints on that yes. And let's go over that. The Republican majorities are quite narrow. In the Senate, it's 52-41 with one uncalled race, although I did read some news that Senator Casey in Pennsylvania had conceded, so that will be 53-47, but that's 7 short of 60 which is needed to end the filibuster, get a vote for cloture. So that's far short of that vote. And in the House, it is 219 to 213 with 3 uncalled races. And it's also worth remembering that this Congress, House Republicans have relied on Democrats to pass major legislation multiple times. Multiple times. They've had like 80 members defect, and Speaker Johnson has had to rely on Democrats. And I think that that dynamic will probably continue into the next Congress. And so with these numbers, reconciliation is the only option for repeal of the IRA. And here are just the numbers here. You can just see how close it was. These were from earlier this afternoon. And I'll also note that 3 House Republicans have resigned or been appointed to positions by Trump. And so their majority is narrow enough that they really can't afford for President Trump to appoint any more, or for at least a temporary amount of time, Democrats could take the majority. So that's how close this is in the House. And I think that that's really important, that they need to pay attention to that is pretty bonkers. So budget reconciliation. This is like a bad movie on repeat on late night television, but let's go over it again. Budget reconciliation is a process that allows specific budget-related legislation to bypass the filibuster so it can pass with just 51 votes in the Senate. It can be used generally once per fiscal year, but it has constraints. Senate procedural rules follow the Byrd rule, which excludes anything from reconciliation that would not produce a change in spending or revenue. So you can't modify regulations, for example. It can't have a merely incidental budgetary effect. So if the Senate parliamentarian rules that the primary purpose of a piece of legislation is not budgetary, it's merely incidental, then that is excluded. It cannot increase the deficit beyond 10 years. And changes to Social Security's retirements, survivors, or disability costs or revenues are not allowable under the Byrd rule. So those are some pretty big constraints on budget reconciliation. So to summarize here, in the Senate, a simple majority is required with reconciliation. In recent years, this has been very partisan, but it is not necessarily so. And Republicans will want to, in the next Congress, extend the Trump tax cuts. That will be their top priority as the Congress starts. And the Trump tax cuts themselves were passed through reconciliation with only Republican votes in 2017. They will also want to repeal the IRA because it is Biden's signature achievement and it is a funding source. And they'll need revenue to do that. The estimated costs of the Trump tax cuts are over $4 trillion. I think it's $4.5 trillion. So the IRA alone won't get them there, not even close, but it's something. So that's another thing to bear in mind. And let's also consider the timeline here. Let's look at recent past major legislation that was passed through reconciliation. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed on November 7th of 2017. So that's the first session of Trump's first term. So they got that done in 10, 11 months. The American Rescue Plan was passed only with Democratic votes on March 10th in the first session. So that was after only 3 months, but that was also in the middle of COVID. So Democrats thought it was really important to get more COVID relief out there. And so they were very unified. There was a crisis pressing that effort. I don't think we're going to see that in this coming Congress. And the Inflation Reduction Act itself passed August 16th in 2022. So that was like 16 months, 18 months. So that took a long time. So for those where there isn't a crisis, we're looking at 10 to 18 months. So there's some time that we're going to make this co-primary ask. We're going to have another bite at the apple is the main point here. So what is that co-primary ask for Republicans? Here it is, and it's pretty straightforward. The IRA is good for business, keep it. This is a broad and simple ask, and we can get more specific later. You can build from this conversation in the future meetings you're going to have with Republicans. The approach we have taken in this ask, just going down section by section, the introduction neutralizes complaints and potentially a waste of time by acknowledging them up front. CCL did support the Inflation Reduction Act. We do like it for its climate benefits, but we don't want to dwell on these points. Republicans already know that 80% of IRA money has flowed to red districts. And so that is not mentioned in this ask because we assume they already know it. We don't want to spend time telling them something they already know. We want to add context and color to that fact. We want to fill in the blanks on that fact. And so the way we do that is we say, this helps the people who elected you. The points that you saw in that document, they highlight the jobs that have been created, the investment that is flowing in. They emphasize how rural communities in particular are benefiting. Talks about the health benefits that accrue to these communities, districts, and states when you reduce pollution. And it also makes the point that these benefits are fragile. They can go away. And in particular, you can trust the businesses who are doing the investments that these benefits can go away. There's a survey that is included in there, and that's what business leaders are saying. So those are the main supporting arguments. I then go on to talk about the methane fee, which is arguably the most vulnerable part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Even though this raises revenue and so should help pay for the Trump extension of the Trump tax cuts, it is tied to regulation. And so I think that Republicans will go after it. And we can get more specific in future asks. If, as we get a better sense of the politics, this really does turn out to be a focus of attack, we can get more specific in future asks of those future meetings. The ask then concludes with, we care about the climate, but we, your constituents, like all these other things that the IRA is doing too. And if you want more details, you can always check out the Nerd Corner. Dana has made a post about this, some of the more details, including the research behind those bullet points. So that is live in the Nerd Corner right now. He is planning a presentation for next year once we know more. So we'll be able to focus on those elements that are most likely to be in the crosshairs. And for state-specific investments, if you would like to look up what the benefits are in your specific state and bring those to your meeting, check out invest.gov. And this on the right, this is from that invest.gov. They have a bunch of state-specific things, but please be sure that you scrub Biden's name if you share any of those resources. So because they're coming from the White House, because they're from the Biden administration, it would look really bad to just print that out with all the letterhead and Biden's name, read through it, put it in your own words, keeping the facts. Don't just print that off and bring it to the office. That will shut things down. And then here's the link below for the state-specific sheets if you want to go directly there. Now, getting near the end here, is this the best ask for Republicans? Well, the reason we believe it is at this moment is because it's a big ask, it's early in their thinking, and it's well suited to CCL's strengths. Specifically, for Republicans to vote to keep the IRA, they are going to need to picture specific people, their constituents, who like it, who want to keep it. That is, they're going to need to picture you. And so because the smart money is on some repeal, what we're doing with this, before things have gotten really specific, you're going to plant that flag in the ground, say, we, your constituents, want you to keep this because we like it for all these reasons. We like these benefits. Those benefits are fragile. They can go away, and we don't want them to go away. And then we can have more specific discussions moving forward. So to conclude, for House and Senate Republicans, we're asking them to protect the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a big, timely ask that is well suited to CCL's strengths. We acknowledge in this ask that we care about the climate and we played a role in passing the Inflation Reduction Act, but we're not going to dwell on that. We want to focus on the benefits Republican voters stand to lose if it is repealed. If it is repealed, it will almost certainly be through reconciliation. And because the House and the Senate are so close, we only need a few votes to vote in favor of protecting this. And there's also likely enough time to have subsequent meetings with more specific asks as the vote gets closer. So that is what I had to say. So we have some time for questions now.
Actually, can you bring up that last slide one more time before we switch to the Q&A? Sorry about that,
Yes,
Danny.
hold on.
And while you're doing that, I just want to make a point. Like, this is a co-primary ask. We still want everybody to ask the Republican members the per main ask, and this is more of we're starting the discussion about IRA defense and make it very clear why it's a Republican ask. This is going to live or die based on Republican votes. We've already made headway. 18 Republicans have signed a letter this Congress to Speaker Johnson saying they don't want to repeal the clean energy provisions of the IRA in its entirety. And so we've already got a beachhead in the Republican circles about saving a lot of this stuff. We have some Republican senators that have already said that they want to preserve parts of the law, but right now we're trying to grow that beachhead so we make sure we preclude any option of like it being repealed wholesale or even the most important provisions. And with that, I think this is a good segue to I want everybody, if you haven't registered, to really think about registering for our virtual fall conference. This is where you're going to get the last, most up-to-date updates right before you go into your lobby week. So please register that. Senator like John Curtis, who is actually one of those signers of 18 Republicans who signed that letter, will be there to give us his thoughts. And Congresswoman Houlihan, who co-leads the bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus, will also share her thoughts with us. And you'll hear from Mr. Richter again, our favorite Danny Nugentella. Mindy will be up there with us. And of course, our new executive director, Rachel Christies, will also be laying out her vision, and we'll be doing not just talking about Lobby Day, we'll be talking about what we see happening in next Congress and kind of our vision for the opportunities to continue to defend the IRA, but also like what are their opportunities for proactive wins. So be sure and register for the conference if you do nothing else tonight.
But I know that before anything else, just speaking for everyone here, almost all 400 of us, thank you so much, Danny and Ben, for walking us through where you're at. So as we like to do, putting a link in the chat here. If you're logged into community and you click that link, it will make sure that you get credit for being here tonight. You're always more than welcome to put any questions that we didn't get to in the forum. After over 60 of them answered, I think that we'll close tonight by just unmuting all lines and giving a huge round of applause again to both Ben and Danny. Thank you so much for your leadership. It's so good to see all of you here tonight. Have a wonderful night. Stay safe, and we can't wait to hear about your lobby meetings.
Thank you all. We're all here because of your work. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.